To understand the magnitude of this disaster, you first have to understand the environment. Kaer, Morhen, the Witcher's Keep. A crumbling pile of stones freezing in the middle of nowhere, inhabited by 4 men who know everything about killing monsters and absolutely nothing about keeping a human being alive, let alone a growing girl. When Ciri was brought there, it was like dropping a delicate orchid into a bag of rusty nails. Vesemir, Geralt, Eskel, Lambert, and Cohen. They had good intentions, I'll give them that. But their idea of childcare was waking her up before dawn, making her run the killer trail until she puked, and feeding her stew made from whatever dead animal they found in the woods. But the real problem wasn't the running or the fighting. It was the diet, specifically. The secret Witcher mushrooms and herbs. They started feeding her these stimulants. Not the full mutagenic grasses that turn boys into witchers, but vegetable boosters. They thought they were helping. They wanted to make her faster, stronger, more resilient. They saw her muscles developing and patted themselves on the back. Look at her, Geralt probably thought, swelling with pride. She fights like a demon. What none of those idiots realized was that they were pumping a prepubescent girl full of magical steroids that were wrecking her internal chemistry. They were treating her like a small man, not a developing woman. And biology, my dear listener, was about to slap them in the face harder than a rock troll. It wasn't long before biology started fighting back against their little chemistry experiment. The Witcher diet began to take its toll. Ciri started to change, but not in the way they expected. Yes, she was fast, but she was also becoming volatile. We're talking about a child on the brink of womanhood, suddenly pumped full of performance enhancers. She wasn't just moody, she was a walking emotional hurricane. Imagine the scene. Ciri is sparring with Lambert. She's exhausted. Her body is screaming in pain from cramps. She doesn't understand, and her head is spinning from those accursed mushrooms. She misses a step. She drops her sword. She snaps at him. And what does Lambert do? Does he ask, "Are you in pain?" Does he offer a hot compress? Number he sneers and tells her she's lacking focus. He tells her to run the trail again. They saw her fainting spells as weakness. They saw her aggression as a lack of discipline. Vesemir, the oldest and supposedly wisest of them, actually thought she was just being a rebellious princess. They were pushing her harder and harder, completely blind to the fact that her body was trying to tear itself apart from the inside. They were trying to forge a sword, but they were about to shatter the steel. Finally, the inevitable happened. The moment that terrifies fathers and clueless guardians everywhere arrived. But at Kaer Morhen, it wasn't just growing up, it was amplified by their magical tampering. Ciri fell ill, or so they thought. She was doubled over in pain, pale as a sheet, trembling. And there was blood panic, pure, unadulterated panic swept through the fortress. You have to understand, these men deal with arterial sprays from griffins and disemboweled ghouls on a daily basis. Blood is their trade. But this kind of blood, this natural, cyclical, female blood. It was like kryptonite. Geralt froze. He looked at her and saw something he couldn't fight with a silver sword. He couldn't brew a potion to fix it because he didn't even understand what was broken. Was it an internal injury from training? Was it a side effect of the herbs? Was she dying? They stood around her bed like 4 lost boys looking at a ticking bomb. They whispered amongst themselves, terrified. Maybe we pushed her too hard. Maybe the mushrooms were too strong. They were guilty, scared, and utterly useless. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that there was a fundamental part of Ciri's existence that their Witcher mutations had rendered them incapable of comprehending. So, what does a Witcher do when he is out of his depth? He calls a sorceress, but not me. Oh no, Geralt was too proud, too scared, or perhaps too guilty to call me first. Instead, they called Triss Marigold. Why Triss? Because she was nice, because she was safe, because she wouldn't yell at them. They wanted a magical nursemaid, someone who would pat them on the head and say, "It is okay, you tried your best." They didn't want the harsh truth, they wanted comfort. Triss arrived, and bless her heart, she was appalled. She saw what they were feeding the girl. She saw the bruising, the exhaustion, the chemical imbalance. But Triss is soft. She tried to explain it gently. She tried to reason with them. "You must stop the mushrooms," she told them. "But she needs the strength." They argued. "She is a girl, not a mutant," she pleaded. They nodded. They listened, but they didn't hear. They just stared at Triss blankly, still hoping she would wave her hand and make the problem go away so they could get back to sword practice. They were relieved she was there to clean up the mess, but they still didn't understand that they were the ones making the mess. Triss stayed at Kaer Morhen for a while, trying to act as a buffer between Ciri and the witch's incompetence. She became a sister to the girl, a confidante. Ciri finally had someone to talk to about things that didn't involve dismemberment or parrying. But the witches, they were impossible. An evening after Triss had spent hours trying to ease Ciri's cramps with magic and hot teas, she walked into the great hall where the men were drinking. She was exhausted, she was frustrated, and she had finally had enough. She looked at Vesemir, at Geralt, at all of them, and she exploded. "Well, as much as Triss can explode. You are idiots," she cried. "She is bleeding because she is becoming a woman. Do you understand? It's natural. It's not a disease you can cure with swallow potion." The silence in that hall was deafening. You could hear the wind howling outside. The witches exchanged glances that ranged from confusion to utter horror. "Woman," Lambert muttered, as if the word was in a foreign language. Triss tried to explain the concept of menstruation to 4 sterile mutants who had been taken from their mothers as toddlers. It was like trying to explain color to the blind. They just sat there, blinking, terrified by the biology of it all. It was pathetic, it was hilarious, and it was deeply, deeply sad. And that brings us back to the letter. Triss realized she couldn't handle Ciri's magical surges alone. The girl was powerful wildly, dangerously powerful. Her source abilities were waking up, triggered by puberty and stress. Triss was a healer, a diplomat, but she wasn't a teacher of chaos. She was scared. She might accidentally burn the girl's brain out, trying to control her power. So she told Geralt the hard truth. "I can't do this, you need Yennefer." Imagine Geralt's face. He would have preferred to fight a dragon naked. He knew he had wronged me. He knew I was probably furious. But he looked at Ciri, suffering and confused, and he knew he had no choice. So he wrote that infamous letter. "Dear friend." He asked for help. He admitted defeat. When I received it, I didn't just see a plea for help. I saw a confession of incompetence. I saw a group of men who had broken something beautiful and were now handing me the pieces, asking me to glue it back together. I didn't come to Kaer Morhen immediately. Oh no, I let them sweat. I let them wonder if I would even reply. But eventually I packed my bags, not for Geralt, not for the witches, but for the girl, because someone had to be the adult in the room. My arrival at Kaer Morhen was nothing short of theatrical. I didn't knock. I teleported directly into the courtyard, creating a sonic boom that probably woke up every sleeping drowner in the valley. Geralt was there, looking like he'd seen a ghost, or worse, an ex-girlfriend. He stammered something, but I walked right past him. My target wasn't the white-haired fool. It was the girl. I found Ciri in the training yard. She looked terrible. Thin, wired, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. She looked like a wild animal that had been cornered. "So, this is the source," I said, looking her up and down. The witches gathered around, defensive like a pack of wolves protecting a cub. "She is not a specimen, Yennefer," Geralt growled. "Quiet," I snapped. "You've had your turn. Look at her." Shaking hands, pale skin, magical aura leaking out of her like water from a sieve. "You've done a marvelous job of nearly killing her." I didn't wait for their excuses. I immediately started issuing orders. "Get me hot water, fresh linens, throw out those disgusting mushrooms. And, for the love of the gods, someone open a window. It smells like wet dog and testosterone in here." The shift in power was instantaneous. They knew, deep down, that their little boy's club was over. Mommy was home. The first order of business was what I called the Great Detox. I marched into their pantry and started pulling down jars, dried lizard tails, questionable fungi, roots that smelled like old socks. I gathered them all in a pile. Lambert, bless his prickly heart, tried to stop me. "Those are essential for her stamina," he argued, blocking my path. "That is a centuries-old Witcher recipe." I looked him dead in the eye and set the pile on fire with a snap of my fingers. "It is a recipe for liver failure, you moron," I told him as the herbs turned to ash. "She isn't a mutant. Her liver doesn't process toxins like yours does. You are not building her stamina. You are slowly poisoning her." The real challenge, however, was Ciri. She didn't want to stop. The mushrooms made her feel strong, fast, invincible. Without them, she felt weak. She felt the pain of her training. She felt human. When I forced her to eat a normal salad, greens, vegetables, actual food, she threw the plate at the wall. She screamed at me. She called me a tyrant. The witches flinched. They wanted to comfort her, but I stood my ground. I didn't coddle her. I looked at that angry, trembling girl and said, "You hate me now. Good. Use that hate. But you are going to eat this food, and you are going to eat this food, and you are going to sleep for 10 hours, and you are going to let your body heal. Because if you ruin your vessel now, all the power in the world won't save you later." It was the first time anyone had told her no in months. Once the physical detox began, it was time for the mental one. Magic isn't just waving your hands and shouting funny words. It is about control. It is about understanding chaos. Ciri wanted to learn fireballs. She wanted to blast rocks apart like she saw the sorcerers do in stories. She was impatient, eager, and reckless, just like Geralt. I took her to the snowy cliffs outside the fortress. "Show me what you can do," I said. She concentrated. She scrunched up her face, strained every muscle, and managed to levitate a small pebble. It shook violently and then fell into the snow. She looked devastated. "Is that it?" she whispered, ashamed. "That," I said, walking over to her, "is chaos without direction. You are trying to force the world to bend to your will. That is not magic. That is tantrum." I sat her down in the snow. "Magic is everywhere. In the air, in the water, in the earth. You don't grab it by the throat. You draw it in. You ask it to lend you its strength." I showed her a simple spell, lighting a small flame in her palm. Not an explosion, just a tiny, steady light. It took her hours. Her hands were freezing. She was crying from frustration. But when that tiny spark finally flickered into existence, her eyes lit up brighter than the flame itself. For the first time, she wasn't just a weapon being forged by men. She was a creator, and I saw the potential in her. Not just for destruction, but for greatness. The days were hard, but the nights were a battlefield. The witches were completely unequipped to fight on. You see, Ciri's power wasn't just a tool, it was a burden. As a source, she was a conduit for chaotic energy. At night, this manifested as terrors, visions of the future, the prophecy of Ithlin, the end of the world. I remember the first time she had a violent trance after I arrived. A scream tore through the keep, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. Within seconds, the door burst open. Geralt, Eskel, and Lambert rushed in, silver swords drawn, eyes dilated, ready to slaughter a vampire or a wraith. They scanned the room, adrenaline pumping, looking for a physical threat. But there was nothing to stab. Just a small girl thrashing in her bed, speaking in a voice that wasn't hers, chanting about the white frost and the wolf's blizzard. I stood by the bed, weaving a calming spell. I looked at Geralt, standing there with his useless sword, looking utterly helpless. "Put that away," I whispered, not breaking my concentration. "You can't decapitate a prophecy, Geralt. You can't parry a nightmare." I saw the realization hit him. For all his mutations, for all his training, he couldn't protect her from her own mind. He had to stand back and watch me dive into the chaos of her dreams to pull her out. It humbled him, and frankly, he needed humbling. Let's be honest. For the first few weeks, Ciri absolutely despised me. And can you blame her? I was the woman who took away her mushrooms, banned her from the sword trail, and forced her to learn elder speech grammar. To her, Geralt was the hero. He was the silent, cool father figure who let her run wild in the mud. I was the winter shrew. I heard her whisper that to Lambert once. I pretended to be offended, but honestly, I appreciated the vocabulary. She would stomp her foot and shout. Geralt wouldn't make me do this. Or Geralt lets me skip a bath. I had to be the cold shower of reality. I would sit her down, grab a comb, and start untangling the bird's nest she called hair. "Geralt," I would tell her, pulling through a particularly stubborn knot. "Sleeps in ditches and smells like horse manure and dried blood. Is that the life you want? Do you want to be a vagabond who scares children in villages? Or do you want to be a woman who commands respect before she even opens her mouth?" She would pout. She would cry. She would try to zap me with static electricity, which tickled, by the way. But I didn't budge. I wasn't there to be her friend. I was there to be the mother she didn't know she needed. Geralt taught her how to survive. I had to teach her how to live. If you think the training yard was brutal, you should have seen dinner time at Kaer Morhen. It wasn't a meal, it was a feeding frenzy. Imagine 4 grown men who have spent their lives eating stale bread on horseback and roasting squirrel over campfires. They didn't use cutlery, they used daggers. They didn't chew, they inhaled. Burping was considered a compliment to the chef, usually Vesemir, who cooked everything until it was grey, and Ciri, she was copying them. I sat down for my first proper dinner with them, and I watched in horror as Ciri stabbed a potato with a hunting knife, gnawed on a bone like a starving wolf, and then wiped her greasy mouth on her sleeve. Geralt looked at her and smiled. "Enough," I said, slamming my goblet down. The table went silent. "From now on," I declared, pulling a set of silver forks and linen napkins out of thin air, "we are going to act like civilized beings, not ghouls fighting over a corpse." I placed a napkin in front of Ciri. She looked at it suspiciously. "What is this for?" she asked. "It is to keep the grease off the tunic I just mended," I replied. "And this," I handed her a fork, "is for eating. Daggers are for killing monsters. Unless that potato is threatening your life, put the weapon away." The witches grumbled. Lambert made a joke about royal fancy bits. But I glared at them until, one by one, they awkwardly picked up the napkins, watching Geralt try to use a salad fork with his scarred, calloused hands. Honestly, it was the best entertainment I'd had in years. The turning point wasn't a magic lesson or a lecture on manners. It was an accident, a stupid, reckless accident involving ice skates. Ciri loved skating on the frozen moat around the castle. It was the only time she felt truly free. One afternoon, she convinced me to watch her. I stood on the bank, wrapped in furs, watching this little girl glide effortlessly over the black ice. She was graceful, fast, beautiful. Then she fell, not just a stumble. The ice cracked. With a sickening sound, she plunged into the freezing water. I didn't think. I didn't cast a spell. I threw myself onto the ice, sliding on my stomach, reaching for her. The water was paralyzing. I grabbed her hand just as she was slipping under. I pulled with everything I had, magic and muscle, dragging her wet, shivering body onto the solid ice. We lay there, panting, freezing to death, our teeth chattering like castanets. She looked at me, eyes wide, water dripping from her nose. You ruined your dress, she stuttered. I looked down. My velvet gown was soaked, muddy, and ruined. My hair was plastered to my face. I must have looked like a drowned rat. And I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of the great Yennefer of Vengerberg, rolling in the mud to save a brat. Ciri stared at me for a second, and then she started laughing too. We laughed until our ribs hurt, until Geralt came running out, looking terrified. That was the moment. The ice didn't just break on the moat, it broke between us. We weren't teacher and student anymore. We were survivors. After the ice incident, Ciri stopped calling me Lady Yennefer, with that mocking tone. She started hovering. She'd watch me mix potions. She'd ask about my travels. She'd sneak into my room just to smell the lilac and gooseberry perfume. One night, a storm was raging outside, a real mountain blizzard that shook the stones of the keep. Ciri had a nightmare again, but this time she didn't scream. She didn't wake the witches. She came to my door. She stood there in her nightgown, clutching a pillow, looking small and fragile. "I can't sleep," she whispered. The old Yennefer would have told her to go back to bed and cast a sleeping spell. But I didn't. I moved over in the bed and lifted the covers. She climbed in, cold feet and all. She curled up against my back, seeking warmth, seeking safety. I could feel her heart beating fast, slowly calming down as I stroked her hair. "Yen?" She mumbled into the pillow. "Yes." "Ugly one," I replied softly. "Are you going to leave me?" The question hung in the air, heavier than any spell. I realized then that she wasn't just afraid of monsters. She was afraid of abandonment. Everyone she had ever loved had died or left. I turned around and pulled her close. "No," I whispered into the darkness. "I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me now." She fell asleep holding my hand, and I lay awake for hours, realizing that for the first time in a century I wasn't alone either. You know what is funnier than a witcher trying to understand menstruation? A witcher trying to understand why his adopted daughter suddenly prefers the company of a nagging sorceress. Geralt started to get twitchy. He would walk into a room where Ciri and I were laughing, and the laughter would stop. Not because we were hiding anything, but because it was girl talk. He would stand there, awkwardly scratching his beard. "So, training tomorrow?" He'd ask Ciri, trying to reclaim his territory. "Maybe later, Geralt," she'd say dismissively. Yen is teaching me how to apply eyeliner. The look on his face. It was like I had stabbed him. Eyeliner over sword practice. He looked at me with betrayal in his eyes. He actually pulled me aside later. "You are making her soft," he grumbled. "I am making her versatile," I corrected him. "A sword is useful, Geralt, but sometimes a well-placed glance is deadlier. Besides, she likes it. She wants to feel pretty. Is that a crime in your mutant handbook?" He didn't have an answer. He just grunted and walked away to sharpen his swords for the 10th time that day. He was jealous. Not romantically, of course. He was jealous that I could give her something he never could, femininity, and it drove him absolutely mad. Winter doesn't last forever, not even at Kaer Morhen. As the snow began to melt, so did our little illusion of safety. I knew it before anyone else. Ciri was growing too fast, and her power was becoming a beacon. Every time she cast a spell, it sent ripples through the magical ether. I could feel it, then others could too. Rians, Vilgeforts, the Nilfgaardians, they were out there, sniffing the air like bloodhounds. I found Geralt on the battlements, staring at the horizon. He was cleaning his sword because that is what he does when he is anxious. He knew what was coming, he just didn't want to admit it. "She is getting better," he said, not looking at me. "She is almost a witcher." "She is a bomb, Geralt," I told him bluntly, leaning against the cold stone. "And this ruin is too small to contain the explosion. She needs more than we can give her here. She needs a school. She needs the Temple of Militelli. She needs to learn control in a place that isn't falling apart." He stopped scrubbing. He looked at me, and I saw the fear in those yellow eyes. Not fear of death, but fear of loss. "You are taking her away. I am saving her," I corrected him. "Again, we can't keep her hidden in a cupboard forever. If we stay here, we're just waiting to be besieged. We have to move." It was the hardest argument we never had, because deep down, under all that stubborn Witcher grumpiness, he knew I was right. Our little winter paradise was over. It was time to face the world. The morning of our departure was grey and sullen, matching the mood of everyone in the courtyard. The Witchers tried to act tough. They stood there with their arms crossed, pretending that saying goodbye to the little girl they had practically raised wasn't ripping their hearts out. Lambert, the prickliest of them all, walked up to Ciri. He didn't hug her, he just handed her a small, crudely carved wooden wolf. "Don't lose it, brat," he grunted. "And try not to die." It was the closest thing to "I love you" that man was capable of uttering. Vesemir was worse. He looked old suddenly, incredibly old. He touched Ciri's cheek with a shaking hand and told her to mind her manners. He looked at me and nodded, a silent transfer of custody. "Keep her safe, Yennefer," his eyes said. But the hardest part was Geralt. He and Ciri stood apart from the others. He adjusted her saddlebags. He checked her stirrups. He was stalling. Finally, he looked at her. He didn't say much. He never does. Just be careful and listen to Yen. But the way he looked at her, it was the look of a man watching his own heart ride away on a horse. I sat on my horse waiting, feeling like the villain of the story. I was the one separating the wolf from his cub, but I kept my face impassive. Someone had to be strong enough to break the circle. "Let's go, Ciri," I said softly. And as we rode out of the gate, I didn't look back. I couldn't, because if I had seen Geralt standing there alone in the snow, I might have turned around. The journey to Elendar was educational, for both of us. I quickly realized that undoing the witch's influence was going to take more than a few lectures. Ciri walked like a soldier. She scanned every tavern for exits and threats. She slept with a dagger under her pillow. One evening we stopped at an inn. A local boy, trying to be charming, made a clumsy pass at her. A normal girl would have giggled or blushed. Ciri, she assessed his center of gravity, grabbed his wrist, and twisted it until he was on his knees, whimpering. I sat there, sipping my wine, trying to hide a smirk behind my goblet. The innkeeper was horrified. "She is a demon," he shouted. "She is efficient," I corrected him, tossing a coin on the table to pay for the boy's bruised ego. Later that night, I scolded her. "You can't just break the wrist of every boy who annoys you." "Ciri, it is bad for business," Lambert said. She started. "Lambert," I interrupted, "is an antisocial misanthrope who lives in a ruined castle. We are in civilization now. Here, we use words to destroy people. It is much cleaner, and it leaves no bruises for the guards to find." It was a struggle. She missed her sword. She missed the simplicity of violence. But slowly, she started to understand that there was power in subtlety too. Although, I have to admit, watching her threaten a merchant who tried to overcharge us for apples, that was pure poetry. We finally arrived at the Temple of Militelli, a place of peace, healing, and absolute matriarchal authority. If you think I'm intimidating, you haven't met Neneki. She is the High Priestess, a woman with a tongue sharper than a witcher's sword and a heart big enough to hold the world's sorrows. She is perhaps the only person on this continent I allow to lecture me. Ciri was confused. She watched me. The arrogant Yennefer of Vengerberg meekly accept a scolding from this stout, grumpy old woman about my skipping meals or my questionable parenting choices. You look like a skeleton, Yennefer. Neneki would bark, shoving a plate of food in front of me. Yes, Neneki, I would reply, eating it without complaint. Ciri stared at us, eyes wide. She realized that even the winter shrew had a mother figure, but the temple wasn't just about food and scolding. It was a sanctuary. For the first time, Ciri didn't have to sleep with one eye open. She didn't have to check for exits. She could just be a girl. She worked in the gardens. She learned about herbs, the healing kind, not the witcher kind. And she learned that strength doesn't always mean violence. Watching her run through the temple gardens, laughing with the acolytes, I realized something terrifying. I was happy. For a sorceress who had traded her ability to bear children for power, standing there watching my adopted daughter bloom. It was the most powerful magic I had ever felt. Our time at the temple ended, as all good things do, with a call to action. The world was burning. War was on the horizon. The Brotherhood of Sorcerers was summoning us to Thane. Before we left, Ciri and I had one last moment of quiet. We were in the library, packing books. She was older now, sharper, more confident. The frightened little girl from Kaer was gone. She looked at me, holding a book about mythical creatures. Do you think we'll ever be safe, Yen? Really safe? I took the book from her hands. Safety is an illusion, Ciri. It is a fairy tale we tell children so they can sleep at night. But we are not children. We don't need safety. We need each other. I touched the obsidian star at my throat, the same star Geralt had once given me, the symbol of our chaotic, messy, unbreakable bond. No matter where this war takes us, no matter how far apart we are thrown, you are my daughter, and I will burn the world down to find you. That is not a prophecy, that is a promise. She smiled, a sad, brave smile that looked so much like Geralt's. I know, she said. We rode out of Elendor the next day into the gathering storm. We didn't know then that Thane would be a disaster. We didn't know we would be separated for years. We didn't know the pain that was coming. But we knew one thing. We were a family. A dysfunctional, mutated, magical family. And nothing, not emperors, not sorcerers, not even destiny itself, could ever break that. Now, go. The candle is out, and I have memories to tend to.